Welcome to Season 4 of AIHA's podcast series, The Healthier Workplaces Show, where we explore timely and informative topics about occupational and environmental health and safety. I'm your host, Alejandro Castillo. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with industrial hygienist Hilarie Warren and Richard Hirsh. Hilarie is the director of the OSHA Training Institute Education Center at Georgia Tech, where she oversees program management, business development, and curriculum delivery for safety and health short courses, including the OSHA Outreach Program, which administers the 10 and 30-hour OSHA credential. Hilarie spent 15 years as an industrial hygienist for the state OSHA consultation program, conducting on-site assessments for health, safety, and environmental hazards at construction sites and industrial facilities all around Georgia. Hilarie acted as the project director for pandemic influenza preparedness training for businesses, an OSHA Susan Harward grant awarded to the consultation program in 2007, and participated on the AIHA construction committee that published the Focus 4 for Health guidance document in 2021. Hilarie is a past president of the AIHA Georgia Local Section, as well as past chair of the AIHA Social Concerns Committee. Retired now, Richard was employed at Nectar Therapeutics as a senior director for environmental health and safety. Richard was responsible for global EHS program development, standards, training, technical assistance, API exposure assessments, and other EHS activities. Richard previously worked for Reuben Haas Company in the global EHS department for 20 years. Richard is an AIHA Fellow, past president of the AIHA Northern California Section, and past chair of the AIHA International Affairs Committee. He received the AIHA Social Responsibility Award in 2012 as team lead for the Developing World Outreach Initiative and the Christine Einer Award from the AIHA Northern California Section in 2011. Hilarie and Richard were part of the team that wrote AIHA's new guidance document, Young Workers/Child Labor in U.S. Today we're exploring how this white paper outlines the growing resurgence of child labor in the United States, documenting rising violations, weakened state protections, and significant injury and fatality risks, especially in agriculture, meat processing, and retail. Hilarie, Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So let's start from the beginning. What was the catalyst that led the AIHA Teen Workplace Health and Safety Committee and the AIHA Social Concerns Committee to undertake this white paper?
Well, I'll take that first question. For me, it was a convergence of events that led me to writing the first draft of this paper in late 2023, around December of that year. So it's almost 2 years ago. First of all, I listened to PBS NewsHour every night and sometimes CNN, and there were several reports on child labor violations in meatpacking and poultry processing. There was an article about kids working night shifts and in hazardous conditions. There was also an expose in the New York Times on this issue. So that's really gave me my first insight into what's been going on. I also, at that time, I was on the California Industrial Hygiene Council board as a representative of for the California Partnership for Young Worker Health and Safety, which is led out here in California by the Labor Occupational Health Program. And we have, biannual meetings. And I found out about this organization called the Foundation for Government Accountability, which I'll talk about later, out of Florida, that had been drafting model legislation to relax state child labor laws. And also at that time, around the same period, there were a few young worker fatalities in California. One teen was working at an auto repair shop doing work he was not trained to do, in which he got crushed by a car because he wasn't supporting the car correctly with the jack. And it was a real tragedy. I think it was around 15 years old. And also, I have been working with the AIHA Teen Workplace Health and Safety Committee, and we've been working to try to get curricula, the Safety Matters curricula, into high schools to teach that curricula on employee rights and employer responsibilities, or the NIOSH Talking Safety curricula, similarly. Mm-hmm. And I had some success in California in getting some volunteers to teach those classes in some of the high schools here in Northern California. Then I found out about the AIHA Grand Challenges Initiative to protect. One of the initiatives is to protect vulnerable work populations, and one of those is surely teenagers. So putting all that together is really the impetus for writing the initial draft. And then when I got to Columbus, Ohio at AIHA Connect that year, I met Hilarie, and she offered to assist in this project, and she was on the Social Concerns Committee. So it was a nice connection between the Teen Workplace Health and Safety Committee and the Social Concerns Committee.
Yeah, I remember that meeting and being really excited about it. I was chairing the Social Concerns Committee at that time, and part of the mission statement for the Social Concerns Committee here at AIHA is to address and respond to vulnerable and underrepresented populations in our workplaces. So it seemed like sort of a perfect fit, and Rich had really done a lot of legwork and was really excited about it. And we talked about it as a committee and agreed this would be something that we would want to collaborate on. And I've at Georgia Tech, where I've worked for 20 years, a number of years ago, we received a Susan Harwood grant from OSHA to develop worker safety training specifically for youth. And I got to work on that project for a couple of years and spend time in high schools, talking to young people about either getting their first job or hearing about their first job experiences, and certainly recognized the need here and was excited to pursue this forward with Rich and the teen committee.
Since 2018, the U.S. Department of Labor reported a 69% increase in children being employed illegally by companies. How do you explain the disconnect between existing federal protections and the growing number of violations?
There's, as our paper, I think, does a good job of trying to tease apart. This is a really complex spider web of federal and state regulations, and they're incredibly difficult to navigate. And then when we know that there's complexity, that leads to gaps and increased risk, of exploitation. I think that there's been a transition in this country, in recent years, probably in the last decade, really moving rapidly towards some non-traditional employment structures, with increases in, independent contractors and gig workers, and decreasing full-time employment, and even just really nebulous definitions around, work structure. And I think that's contributed. And I also think it's worth reflecting on what has happened since 2020 and the pandemic. I think that there's been a higher number of youth needing to enter the workforce sort of earlier or for longer periods of time to supplement their family's income when it's been lost, due to the primary earners, being taken out of the workplace due to the COVID-19 impacts. And I think we've got data, right, that shows that 50% of young workers are contributing a portion of their earnings towards their families. And I think that's increased in the last several years. So those are a few things from my perspective. Rich, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would also say, I think those are all good points. But, even more recently, we've seen the budget cuts through DOGE affecting OSHA, affecting NIOSH, which could provide outreach and information, education on this topic to employers. So I think that contributes. We've seen the child migration into kids seeking asylum in the country over the last several years through the pandemic. And from my reading, many of them have sort of become indentured servants, working for third-party contract service agencies at arm's length from the parent company, whether it's in poultry processing or meat packing or even car manufacturing. where they come in as cleaning crews, and the kids get housing through these third-party contractors, and they're sort of at arm's length, and they don't want to draw attention to their undocumented status, and they're intimidated from reporting violations, so they got to go under the radar. They're also cheap, so the employers find them an attractive source of labor, and they don't question authority. They don't know their rights. Employers might not even know their own responsibilities. And then there's also gaps in work permit processes to make sure kids are of legal age to do certain jobs. And those are gaps, I think, in the school systems as well. And then in the paper, we write about the agricultural loopholes and exemptions from some of the federal Labor Standards Act. And so that's also a problem. And then, finally, the relaxation of some of these child labor laws that has been going on for a few years now in various states around the country.
Now, to what extent is the rise connected to immigration system gaps or labor shortages?
I mean, it's certainly connected, but it's hard to say to what extent, because the data available is pretty piecemealed, right? And it's incomplete. There's not one specific reporting source. It is clear that a number of states and state legislative efforts to loosen child protections is due to the pressure to fill tight labor markets. The Florida legislation that was proposed in early 2025 to eliminate hour and time of day restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds during the school year, right? During school year, school day, not just during summer months, for example. And then also to further reduce limitations for even 14 and 15-year-olds during the school year. That was specific to fill a shrunken labor pool that was resulting from Florida's really strong anti-immigrant policies. This type of proposed rollback, it leads young people to, a really difficult choice. They might be working to help their families make ends meet, and now they've got a dilemma, right? Do they stay in school but potentially lose this job that they have if a boss schedules them for work hours with no restrictions? Or do they take the hours but then suffer academically, in their schoolwork? And so it's an incredibly uneven power dynamic that's been put in play.
So what role can schools play in ensuring workplace readiness and safety awareness among young people?
So I think there's a number of items that are being done, but maybe not consistently everywhere, right? And an approach that I think we suggest in the paper is that schools could find ways to better integrate workplace safety education into their curriculum to educate youth about hazard awareness early on, right? Like we can start in second grade. I've gone and talked to second graders about how to identify different hazards, right? But as students move closer to employment age, information about their rights and employer responsibilities and how to report a safety concern, I think could be added. No, nothing's got to be recreated. There's a lot of really excellent free curricula that's already out there. I think Rich mentioned even early on that the AIHA Safety Matters curriculum, the NIOSH Youth at Work, Talking Safety materials are out there, have been really well received. OSHA's website has things specific for youth, for educators, for the youth themselves, for parents to take a look at. That's at osha.gov/young-workers. There's ways that the schools can integrate it in. I think that there's certainly working on strengthening the work permit process. Sort of near and dear to my heart, just because I have a background in going on site to different companies to do evaluations, for them and regarding hazard awareness, is that I think that there should be someone that's looking to do an on-site evaluation ahead of time, and then throughout the work placement process for these students that are going out for either, internships or apprenticeships or some work experience, that we could be looking at these locations ahead of time to make sure working conditions are appropriate. And I think also really importantly that is if a company that's been selected for a placement opportunity like this, if they have anything other than an impeccable safety record, or they can't speak to how young workers specifically are going to be protected while they're, working for them, I think strong consideration really needs to be given on whether they're an appropriate fit for a work placement or apprenticeship or an internship, starting with prevention first.
Renew your AIHA individual e-learning subscription by December 31st to save $49 and unlock 24 hours of live and on-demand webinars for 2026. Scan the QR code to learn more.
The white paper notes that agriculture accounts for more young deaths than any other industry. Why is that?
Well, having spent a little time on a farm, right, agricultural work is uniquely dangerous for a number of reasons. And it's because the hazards of the work are really wide ranging, right? There's heavy equipment, moving parts, exposure to extreme weather conditions, chemical and pesticide exposure, unique endemic, biotoxins in the soil, depending on where you are in the country, unpredictable live animals, right? And so the list goes on. And for minors whose bodies, are still developing, and their systems, and they metabolize chemicals differently than we do as adults, or their bodily strength is not where it is as an adult for really rigorous manual material handling, for example. Those risks just compound. The National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety, they noted in 2020 that a child dies in an agriculture-related incident every 3 days. So it is uniquely dangerous. And there's minimal federal and state oversight. The rules are really confusing. The Department of Labor's laws vary depending on where the child age falls, something from 12 to 14 and then 16 to 17, and whether it's after school hours, whether it's a non-hazardous job with parental consent, if a waiver has been obtained, if it's a family-owned farm, if family members are working there. It's a lot to sort out and keep track of, which I think again leads to it being inherently really dangerous for this group of young people. Family-owned farms where only family members are working, regardless of age, they're exempted from an OSHA OSHA coverage, which means both the rules and then the enforcement of those rules, because family members aren't considered employees. And then if you're a small farm, have employing not family members, but just less than 10 people, period, that farm is also exempted from OSHA coverage, and OSHA would not inspect even if there was an accident. So those are just a couple of the things that I think make agricultural really high on the list for concern when it comes to young people and their work there. Anything else to add?
I would add a couple things. You covered most of it, but I would also say, again, with the undocumented workers on farms, they might not actually be counted in the less than 10 non-family members or non-farm family employees if they're undocumented, because they're sort of under the radar again. And so they might have more than 10 non-farm family employees, but they just don't get counted. So I think that's another loophole that's probably there. The other things I would say, Hilarie alluded to it, but some of these kids can operate tractors. Their falls, we noted in the paper, is the major source of of injury and fatalities in agriculture, falling in silos, harvesting fruit in trees, that type of work. And then, some of the other stressors, kids are not allowed to handle class 1 or class 2 pesticides, but there's pesticide drift, and they could be working in the fields where those pesticides are being used. So they might not handle them directly, but they could be exposed. Same thing with heat stress. The kids can't protect themselves from heat stress the way an adult can, and other stressors, as Hilarie had alluded to. Same thing with exposure limits. They don't apply to children. Personal protective equipment is usually not made for children, in their sizes. So all of those things compound to make it a uniquely dangerous job in agriculture.
I just think in general, the public's pretty out of touch with how food arrives, onto the plate, whether it's something you're preparing yourself at home or in the restaurant or getting at the grocery store. I don't think that most of us know. I didn't know, until we were really digging into the research for this paper, that there's almost 500,000 child farm workers, and that's defined as under 17 years old, involved with food and crop production, in this country. And that's staggering to me. But I also know for these family farms, especially, they've got a really deep rooted history and a family legacy, and proud family legacy, right? And it's just how it's always been. So I think it's even, on that side as well, just sort of not knowing anything different necessarily, and it's hard to imagine it being something different.
I would just add, I think, Hilarie again alluded to this. There's a lot of legal ambiguity of whether the farm is exempted from the labor law itself or just exempted from enforcement of the labor laws. So that's a big source of confusion. The reporting of injuries and illnesses on farms is weak at best. As I said before, there's a large undocumented workforce, so it goes unreported many times. And also the other fact that is very troubling is about 20% of all the farming fatalities that occur in this country involve child farm workers.
That's a devastating fact. Wow. Now, 31 states have introduced bills to weaken child labor laws since 2021. Why do you think these rollbacks are spreading so rapidly?
I think there has been a well-organized, concerted effort by certain groups. There's a conservative group I mentioned earlier called the Foundation for Government Accountability out of Florida that has created model legislation that they have disseminated to receptive legislators in various states to relax child labor laws around the country. And, we mentioned before the labor shortages and cheap labor due to undocumented migrant workers that exacerbate the situation. I think those are all, dynamic reasons why these rollbacks have been spreading.
Now, what exactly is Project 2025?
Well, the Heritage Foundation, which is the author of Project 2025, proposes that the Department of Labor roll back regulations that currently restrict underage workers from taking regulated jobs in dangerous fields. It also argues that underage teens offer an opportunity to fill labor shortages in these hazardous workplaces. It also proposes that the Department of Labor should amend its hazardous work order regulations to merit teens to access work as long as they have training and parental consent, which directly contradicts years of legislation ensuring that some jobs are simply not to be performed by minors. Iowa now allows 14-year-olds to perform assembly work in factories and meatpacking facilities, which directly violate the federal child labor laws. Federally, those laws apply unless the state's laws are more restrictive. But in the cases where the state laws are less restrictive, the federal laws are supposed to be applied. Other states like Arkansas have removed age verification requirements for hiring children. Florida has proposed relaxing guidelines which would allow 16-year-olds to work longer hours on school nights, which likely will lead to lost sleep, missed school days, falling behind on schoolwork, and reducing the quality of their education.
The white paper recommends expanding OSHA authority and increasing the Department of Labor budgets. What political or structural barriers stand in the way?
On one hand, each administration that comes in with its own priorities, and also whether they're going to go with a carrot or a stick approach, right? Like, or is OSHA going to focus on enforcement, or are they going to focus on outreach and training? And that pendulum swing that can happen every 4 years, right? Like, that can be a barrier for both businesses and those that are focused, I think, on outreach and training, because it often dampens momentum just after progress has potentially been made, right? So the other thing is that OSHA is an agency with a limited budget and personnel, and it has to remain adaptable to respond to the unexpected as well, like whether there's an emerging hazard or an incident that needs focused resources. So I'm thinking of like when the sugar refinery exploded in Georgia in 2008 because of combustible dust, or hazardous cleanup after a hurricane like Katrina, or the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Like that took resources that could have been, allocated and were designated to be allocated for one thing and needed to be sort of rerouted to address those emerging elements. But on the other hand, right, like the reality is that political will is just sort of not always there. And this particular worker group is a constituency that doesn't have a significant lobbying influence to fight on its behalf for change. There are a lot of people out there doing good work, doing hard work, have dedicated their lives to it, but it's really hard when you're up against other really big industry influences.
AIHA Connect 2026, Respirable Crystalline Silica and Other Minerals and Metals. Symposium call for papers deadline is January 14th. Scan the QR code to learn more.
So I would say, improved injury and illness data just allows one to make better decisions. I always believe in trading conservatism for data. And that would allow us to focus on the worst violating industries where we're seeing injuries and illnesses. It would allow us to tailor our regulations appropriately, tailor our outreach efforts to ensure we're hitting those vulnerable populations, ensuring that we're providing educational materials in languages that are understood by those groups of people, of children that need educational materials, and also to focus on making the work permit requirements and the processes for issuing work permits in school systems more robust, especially in areas where we're seeing those types of injuries and illnesses occurring, and as well as ensuring that our medical community and services and surveillance of medical injuries that might relate to the workplace are captured through proper surveillance. Hilarie, if you have something else.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you brought up a really good point around the medical community and medical services that, that's often an area where, at least from an OSHA perspective, I think we would be looking for referrals to be made. But it means that primary care providers, right, or urgent care clinics or emergency rooms, et cetera, like those service providers need to know what to kind of look for and how to ask those questions. If someone is showing up injured and it not assuming a kid fell out of a tree, for example, right, and instead sort of asking more along the lines of, what was going on, and understanding that there's probably going to be some reticence to sharing that, and and some concern. So making sure, I think, that that medical providers are equipped to know what they might be facing and how to ask those questions and how to render both obviously the medical care, but the sort of follow up of what else can we ask here? What else can we do? It's going to require everybody really sort of working together, right? It's a large group of stakeholders and invested groups that need to be on alert and need to be asking those questions so that we can work together to protect these kids.
If the current trends of child labor continue unchecked, what do you foresee child labor in the U.S. looking like in 10 years?
Well, I remain hopeful. I'm forever an optimist, despite the current trends. And hopefully we can correct the current slide that we've been witnessing. But it really can't remain unchecked, or we will continue to see child fatalities and injuries in multiple sectors of society, as well as a decline in their, the repercussions of that are a decline in their education, their psychosocial and economic well-being, and other attributes that we expect children to gain as they grow up. So I think we need to strengthen our regulations and enforcement, and also specifically remove these farm loopholes that we wrote about.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I also am an optimist. I've got two fairly young children myself, and thinking about what their future looks like, and one of them is getting ready probably to start working next year. That old summer job, and it's on my end. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for a while. That's the program that I run. And I think it is, it's making sure that just even the general public, right? Like parents, right? Like myself, even, folks that aren't necessarily working in this particular field or space, know what's out there, know what we're up against, know where the privilege exists and where it doesn't, and where we need to be working really collectively to make sure we're protecting the most vulnerable. All kids deserve to be working safely, for their whole lifetime. And I think we need to work hard, like Rich said, to start checking this slide before it goes much further.
As we approach the end of this episode, what message do you want to share to the public?
I would say, if they don't want to read the entire white paper, I would direct them to the recommendations section at the end of the paper for each of the societal groups, in which we outline clear strategies and actions that employers and their supply chains could take, that workers can take, that government agencies can take, parents, communities, healthcare professionals, as well as the American Industrial Hygiene Association and other non-governmental organizations, to advocate for policies for young workers, and through legislation, OSHA enforcement, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, as well as state legislators, actions that they can take to help protect young workers from harm.
Just in general for the public, there's been plenty of people that have said, but I think James Baldwin said it pretty well, right? Like the children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the globe. And I think we can be afraid, but we can address complex issues. And we can do so with the data that we have right now. I'm a data person. I'd always like more of it, but I think that while we can certainly continue to study this problem, we can continue to train people about the problem and how to protect themselves from hazards, but we can't solve this problem unless the stakeholders, I think, choose to act preventatively on what we already know contributes to the situation that we're in. And it's like Rich says, sort of weak laws, market forces, failures in our immigration system. We have to address those elements and and do so collectively.
Hilarie, Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're so
Thank you.
welcome. Thanks for having us.
That wraps up today's episode of the Healthier Workplaces Show. To learn more, visit the AIHA website and follow us on social media. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, remember that healthier workplaces mean a healthier world. Until next time.